Hi,
Hi.
gosh, Kerry.
Hi. Thank you
Um,
for being patient with us, everybody. We had to do a little bit of catching up.
yeah, we had to talk about our kids
Yeah, in our lives.
and our lives and how you've been. I've been watching your travels around the world with your book.
Oh, thank you. Well, I want to thank you publicly for being one of the first people to read the book because it meant so, like, nobody knows books like my friend Reese. So to be able to send it to you and have you be so thoughtful and kind and supportive, and also because you know my family so well. So it just meant a lot to me across a lot of sort of areas that I could send it to you and have you witness me so early in the process.
Well, it's such an incredibly brave memoir you've written here. So I just want to tell everybody a little bit about you, my amazing friend Kerry Washington. As so many of you out there know her, obviously, and you've been captivated by her incredibly beautiful, moving performances in so many movies and so many television shows, and also moved by her incredible activism work on behalf of women and underserved families all over this country, and really educating people about the political process. Many people, including myself. I business. We would always end up sitting next to each other at events, and I was always curious about her journey through motherhood and her professionalism. And we had a lot of mutual friends.
Yeah.
We got really close in 2017 through an experience of a reckoning in Hollywood around pay inequity, sexual harassment that had been rampant in our business. And a lot of women got together and started having conversations that we had never had before. So we developed this very close friendship through a feeling of processing that. But that's when I started seeing Kerry as this woman who not only is incredibly intelligent and understands so much about how to work through a process, but also gathering people, navigating deep conflict and offering people grace through all of it. You're one of the most just there's so many words to describe you, but being on set with you, we actually ended up doing a television show after that. Um, but I was just struck by the way you move through the world, the way you acknowledge people and make them feel seen and heard. You set a tone. You also navigate conflict so beautifully, and I've seen you do it over and over again. And so you're also a very deeply private person. So
I have been.
you're one of the most private people I've ever met. So when you sent the galleys of this book to me, I was blown away by your honesty and your vulnerability and your choice to reveal so many of the deepest parts of yourself that made you who you are.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just tell you, first of all, I loved the book. It's so beautifully written. You're an incredible writer, as you know. I mean, you are just such an amazing writer and actress and director, so many things. Um, but I wanted to just sort of start at the beginning about your beautiful memoir, Thicker Than Water. And why you, first of all, you could have written just about, I'm sure everybody here has read a little bit about the revelation of your identity. You write about so much more than that.
Yeah.
Or sort of how you began.
How I began writing it?
How you sort of began writing it, and did you think you were going to write about one thing, and then it just
Yeah.
started unpeeling and layering?
So I was coming to the end of a long job on television, playing a character for a really long period of time. And the original book that I sold, and you guys, if we mention any of the work that we've done, just know we're in the midst of a strike. So we're not encouraging anybody to go watch those shows or movies. Don't watch anything until we have a new contract, and then watch everything. But right now, don't watch anything. So I was ending that job, and the original book idea that I had was to write like a fun, like sort of a little bit self-reflective, but just like a popcorn book about the 10 things I learned playing Olivia Pope. And
Oh,
that was a fun book.
I love
And I sold that book. Yeah. In the midst of me selling that book, my parents shared this revelatory information with me about my dad, who I imagine everybody on here knows, but I will, just so we're all on the same page, my parents told me, actually in the apartment that I'm sitting in right now, my parents told me that my beloved dad, who worships Reese Witherspoon, is not my biological father, that I was conceived with the help of a sperm donor. And I got that information while I was going out to sell the other book idea. And I was like, okay, because I'm a good compartmentalizer who knows how to keep my professional life and my personal life separate. And I was like, I'm just going to go sell this book and deal with my personal stuff behind closed doors and at other times. And then I sold that book. It was really exciting. And every time I would sit down to write it, it was blank. Like, I was supposed to be writing about all of the wisdom I had gained over those 7 seasons. And instead, all I could think about was everything I didn't know. All I could think about was how my life had been turned upside down. And I didn't know half of my biology. And I wanted to write something much more honest, but of course I was not going to write that book. So I tried to give the publisher their money back. I was like, I'm not writing a book. I'm so sorry, guys. I just can't write a book. And they were just really patient with me and really supportive. And eventually, I mean, like a year and a half later, I shared with my publisher and my agent what was going on in my personal life. And they said, do you think you would write that book? And I said, oh, no way. And then I kind of started to feel the pressure of keeping this family secret. You know, my parents had sort of shared this with me, but asked me to keep it to myself. And so I was now complicit in this false narrative that they had carried for 4 decades. And that started to feel really uncomfortable. So I started to write it, I think initially just for myself and for my kids. And I thought maybe I'll share it with anybody, but no promises. And I'm really glad that that was the approach I took, because I really wrote this book for me.
Mhm.
And I did let my parents and my husband see it before sending it to the publisher, because there's so much in there about them. But I didn't write it for anybody else, which felt really important. Yeah.
Well, I there's so much that is revealed to you in this. I want to go back a little bit to when you were young, and you talk so beautifully in the book about feeling like there was something that your parents were not telling you, but you always had this feeling inside, like something you didn't know. And I thought this quote was beautiful. Like, a lot of families, the magic trick was in the pretending. We pretended to ourselves and to each other and to the outside world that our family was not suffering the pain of life disappointments. We were fine. But I learned a long time ago that fine can be an acronym for fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. I've never seen that before either, but I say I'm fine all the time.
Mhm.
And I was really moved by this idea that your parents were masking things. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what that was
Yeah.
like?
It's so interesting because now, you know, once I got this information, I started reading everything I could about donor conceived kids, and also reading a lot about adopted kids who, you know, found out later in life, because I suddenly had this new identity as part of this community of donor conceived people who learn for the first time. And I read story after story of people feeling like I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I knew that they were keeping something from me. I knew that I was an outsider in my own home. I knew that there was a reason that my parents held me at arm's length. And it was so weird for me, because I am so loved. You've met my parents. I am so loved, and I was so wanted as a child. Like, our family is spectacular. And I had this other truth that was like, I know that there is something. It was almost at the risk of calling myself a princess. It was like a princess and a pea, like this thing that I couldn't sleep. It was like this nagging something that I couldn't put my finger on. So when they told me, it was So wonderful, because I think their greatest fear was that our family would fall apart, that I would be angry with them, that I would feel betrayed, that I would no longer consider my dad. And the opposite happened. Like what really happened was I felt so grateful to finally be in truth with my parents. Like I felt the veil lift. I felt the emotional distance, the moat between us like disappear. I suddenly felt like this is it. Like I'm looking in your eyes and now I'm getting the truth. You're not hiding anything from me anymore. And it really provided this opportunity to be in this deeper, richer, more vulnerable relationship with each other. And I doubt there was, I went through all these different emotions. There eventually was some anger and some feelings of betrayal, and that stuff came up.
I'm
But
glad to hear that. I think that's an important part of the process.
yeah, it is.
Not have some feeling of, why didn't anybody tell me?
Yeah,
Why were
yeah,
they? Why do you think they held that for so long, your mother
yeah.
and your father? And I have
No.
great compassion for Valerie and Earl too, because it must have been so hard for them to hold, when you are so close as you guys are, and your mother didn't tell her sister or
Not a
her.
soul, not a therapist, not a pastor, not like, I'm like, she is a badass. Like, I don't know how I wouldn't have been able to walk with something.
I'm going to tell
So
her my secrets.
I know, it's the vault. My mother is the vault. So I think, one of the things I had to realize is this was not like today, right? Like we both have friends who have had donor conceived kids. You go to a sperm bank and you have a binder and you can flip through and pick what Ivy League school they went to and the color of their eyes and their height. But this was the Wild West. My parents had no idea. There were no sperm banks. There was no frozen sperm. This was highly experimental, all hush hush, very secretive. And they knew nothing about the donor. They said, we want him to be healthy and we want him to be Black, because they didn't want anybody to know that I was conceived with the help of a donor. And so part of it was the culture around this experiment was a culture of secrecy. I mean, the doctor said, do this thing and then go home and have sex. It's also so weird to talk about my parents having sex all the time on book tour, but like do this thing and then
Your parents having sex.
and then go home and do it. And then you'll have plausible deniability.
Right? So there was a doubt there.
Yes, right. Because nobody knew there would be 23andMe and Ancestry.com and ways to track this information down. So I think part of why they didn't tell me is because they thought they could take it to their grave. And they thought, obviously my parents didn't sit down one day and were like, let's destroy a person's sense of identity. Like, let's really screw up a child. They were like, let's love this child as our own because she's ours and we don't ever want her to feel othered, even though I did, but they didn't know that. They had no idea that was my experience. So they wanted to protect me from difficult truths. They didn't want me to feel different or othered or separate from them. And then I think, once you keep a secret for a long time, I think it just gets harder and harder, to be honest. I talk about that with my kids all the time. Like the longer you keep the secret, the more difficult it is to be honest. Because I've said to her, like, I sort of get the first 20 years, but then I've been an adult for a long time. So like, for example, when I was pregnant, yes, like when I was pregnant and doing my genetic testing and I was like, hey, anything I should know about? Like that would have been an opportunity.
I was having a good time.
Yeah. And I think some of the anger actually really came up because I am searching for my donor. I feel like I'm not looking for a dad. I have a dad. I love my dad, but he's the best. For anybody who hasn't seen the show that Reese and I did together, he had a very profound scene with Reese.
Very important role. He is, to this day, my favorite co-star. I'm sorry, Kerry.
I will tell him.
And Jennifer Aniston and.
I love it. Love it. So he, so sweet. I totally forgot what I was saying because I'm so distracted thinking about how sweet you guys were together.
He is so sweet. We were talking about him in the show that we did and how he feels. Like, I'm sure this was a hard thing him to get
Very
to.
hard. But also, I think it's interesting. It was a different kind of hard for my dad because, there was different for them because my mom, I really do think, sort of held a secret for 40 years. My dad really was in denial. Like he truly was like, she is mine and I am hers, and there's nothing to talk about. Like his
Yeah.
body knew because he started to have these panic attacks when I started to do research into my genetics. But to this day, or like when I sat my dad down after doing the testing and I said, Dad, I talked to the doctor and it turns out that there's a 0.0000001% chance that you're my biological father. His response was, there's a chance, right? Like he's like, you haven't found him because maybe I'm it. And I'm like, okay. He's
Yeah.
just, he's been crazy supportive of me and this book. And I know it's been hard for him because his only reality is that I'm his and he's mine. And I kind of love that about my dad.
I mean, that's amazing. But there were so many things about your upbringing that I didn't know. And I thought you were so brave in talking about different aspects of secrets that were kept in your family, whether you were talking about early in your childhood, your dad was drinking, and your mother, putting up a mask when he came home. I thought, I grew up, there was an alcoholic in my family, and that part that you described, that your mother would instruct you to be patient and nice to your dad, to not say too much to upset him, but the jangle of the keys and the top and bottom of the locks to return to me and smile apologetically and gave me a coded warning. I was so moved by that because that is exactly the behavior I saw in one of my parents when the other was drinking. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that masking and how that taught you to mask
Yes.
who
I
you
mean,
were.
I'm so lucky that I feel like this might be true for you as well, that there was this level of performativity in my home that I'm so lucky that I found a career where I could learn where to put those skills at performance in a healthy place, right? Apply this kind of hypervigilance of studying people and looking for cues and learning to mask to make everything okay, that I've learned how to do that in my work now instead of in my life. But as a kid, there was this, there were all of these lessons about how to be somebody other than who I really was. And, and so there was always this sense that performance was what was right, that my value was in my performance of perfection and ease, and instead of being authentically me.
Yeah.
Which, it's funny how something can be a superpower in one way, right? Like that allowed me in many ways to be able to walk through very difficult situations in life and be able to achieve in difficult, challenging personalities and all that. But it also became not an asset. It became one of the places where I struggled in life to be able to, like, I had to fight for my authenticity and my
That's what I
truth.
was gonna say. When was that moment where you were like, because I've had it in my life too, where I learned, wait, the mask isn't working anymore.
That's right. Or it might be working for other people, but it's not working for me anymore.
I'm down inside, no one knows who I really am or what I'm really dealing with. Can you describe maybe those moments where you were like, I gotta start to show up for myself?
Yeah, I think it really started in college. It's been a really long journey, and I do think that one of the gifts that my parents gave me by telling me this revelatory information is they allowed me to have more of an intimate relationship with them, for sure, but they also allowed me to have more of an intimate relationship with myself,
Mm.
because all of the gaslighting that was going on in my life, in my family, it kind of taught me to not be authentic, to perform, to wear a mask, to be who other people need me to be, and to ignore my intuitive self, to ignore my healthy sense of connection with myself. So when they gave me this information, it was almost like, oh, I'm not crazy. there was something going on in my home. And I was able to kind of start to rebuild a bridge back to my knowing, back to like trusting myself. But I think I started that process, that like, how can I find my authenticity more, in college, when I was really struggling with my eating disorder, because that was the first time that I was like, I can't fix this by myself. I
Mm.
am in a situation that is bigger than me. And I know I should be able to stop doing this really toxic, unhealthy behavior, like abusive behavior to myself, but I don't know how to stop. And so it was the first time in my life that I really asked for help and was like, I want to be able to be myself. I think I realized like the only way I'm going to get well is if I can be myself in therapy, in therapeutic situations. And so that was the beginning of me sort of realizing how out of touch with myself I was, that I was using food to kind of stuff my feelings down and using exercise to escape myself. And so I really needed to start to figure out how to have a relationship with myself. But it's
Yeah.
been a journey, girl.
I mean, I think that was such a revelation to me too, reading about the sort of the connection that exercise and eating had to you in your life and this control around it, which makes total sense, when you feel
Especially
like,
in our business.
I mean, our business is brutal. The way we're spoken to at the time that you and I started, I mean, I was told over and over again, lose weight or stay in shape or work out more. And or people are watching
Or you want to eat that. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard, and you don't want anything to inhibit your dream because you
Yeah,
think,
that's right.
right? And it's so, and we were told at the time, you had to look a certain way in order to be accepted. And then, if you had I don't even know how you had a healthy, I guess you had a great therapist in college who helped you work through this, like, their name, because I still struggle with what is the right amount of exercise, what is the right kind of eating, and it's all control. So I was really happy that you spoke about that. It's really important to hear. You also talk about a struggle with drugs and alcohol in high school. Um, and I thought that was really fascinating piece of your story as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you were doing these performances in school about don't do drugs and don't.
And then doing drugs.
You were part of the theater company that was traveling around to schools exhibiting bad teenage behavior, but meanwhile you were, experimenting with it yourself.
Yeah. It's an interesting time because I felt that theater company, being a part of that theater company was extraordinary. It was part of the best acting training I've ever had because we would write these shows around adolescent issues. We were all teenagers and we would write these shows about teenage sex and safer sex and homosexuality and drug abuse and self-esteem and HIV prevention. And so we'd write these incredible shows where the characters had problems that weren't solved. They were like open-ended vignettes. So we'd
Mhm.
stay in character after the show for the audience to talk to us and help us. But it
Mhm.
was where I really learned to build background for a character. Because somebody from the audience would say, like, well, what does your mom think? And I'd be like, I better know what my mom thinks. Like, I'd have to think on my feet. And they'd come up, or I'd say, like, well, you tell me what to say. So you really had to be able to defend your character's position and really know them inside and out. And sometimes I was playing more than one character in the show. I'd do different vignettes. So I'd like put a hat on and be one girl and then take the hat off and be another girl. It was really incredible acting training. And I loved it. It was one of the first times in my life that I really connected the power of art to transform people's lives, because we were doing the show to really try to save lives.
Yeah.
To do it at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, where we were, giving kids tools to be able to protect themselves from this, fatal, fatal virus at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and then on my own, I was experimenting and having sometimes a hard time implementing the things that I was saying out in the world. Again, I was wearing the mask of the good girl and had figured it all out, but behind closed doors, I was struggling
Mhm.
and acting out. But I never struggled with drugs and alcohol as much as I did with food and exercise, because I had this good girl facade that I was trying to maintain. So, exercise and food, those are more socially acceptable vices that, everybody eats when they're sad, and it's good for you to work out. So I felt like I could get away with that behavior in a way that I kind of knew that drugs and alcohol, given my history, given the environment I came from, could maybe take me down. I didn't like, my, as you said earlier, the manipulation around the food and exercise is really about control. Like even today, it's never as bad as it was, God willing, knock on everything. It's never as bad as it was back in those days. But I know if I'm like, if I'm full in my meal and I still want to be eating, I'm like, oh, what feeling am I avoiding? Or I've like hit that mark on the treadmill and I don't want to get off of it. I'm like, oh, I wonder what I'm avoiding today. So I still have it as a litmus test. It's a place where I try to control my internal life
Mhm.
by controlling things externally. And in drugs and alcohol, there was too much out of control, right? Like when I was high or drunk, I was like, oh, I can't get back in control. So this cannot be my drug of choice because this I can't be in control here.
Yeah, that makes sense, I
Yeah.
think. A Another thing that you talk so beautifully about, I thought, is just so many things that have happened to you in terms of fertility, miscarriage, abortion, having a baby, 2 babies. Um, you just speak so beautifully about it, and I think you talk a lot about that. There's a lot of shame attached to these ideas of, particularly back in the day when your mother was, doing artificial insemination and how it wasn't spoken about. Can you talk a little bit about how you've navigated so many of these situations as a woman? I think women are really craving people's authenticity in these stories. And when I read the book, I felt so close to you because I didn't know that you had been through so much as a
Mm.
young woman, and as a woman trying to have a baby with this man you love. Maybe talk a little bit about the secrets. You say we're only as sick as our secrets, which is
Yeah, I think I realized that so much of why my family had struggled in the ways that we had, or why we had had this emotional distance, was because our reproductive lives are so shrouded in secrecy. We're not supposed to talk about it. And I think, initially that's why I was born into this secret, was they were told not to tell anybody, and not to tell me. And I think about that a lot. I think about this little infant coming into the world and looking up and immediately was being lied to. And again, out of love, not out of malice, but I think kids sense, for me, I was so provided for and so taken care of, but there was a lack of emotional safety because
mm,
I knew I wasn't getting the full truth, even though I didn't know. But I felt like if I'm going to write about this revelation, then I want to write about the the kind of many secrets that I've held around my fertility and around reproduction. And it felt really freeing. It felt really liberating to be able to share, because it's such a huge part of who we are as women. And it's insane that we're taught that it's shameful to be honest about these journeys that so many of us are on. I mean, I remember when I had my miscarriage, I said to my OB, well, my OB told me that she had one. And I was like, why are you just telling me now? And she was like, well, I don't want to be the OB that goes around talking about miscarriages. Like, who's coming to that OB? And I was like, oh, okay. But you feel so lonely, to your earlier point of the masks, when we wear the masks behind them, we're so lonely because we never get to show anybody our real selves, and we never get to know that we can be loved as our real selves. So it's not
mm,
until we sort of are able to break open and share this vulnerability with each other. I mean, that was one of the things that occurred to me when when my parents told me, and I write about this, but I remember looking over at my dad and he looked so terrified. It was so clear that he was terrified he was going to lose me. And I realized in that moment that my dad had only heard "I love you" under the condition of this lie, right? That like every time I had said, I love you, there must have been some tiny part of his brain that was like, well, she loves me because she thinks I'm her dad. And if she finds out I'm not her dad, she might not love me, because that's part of why they didn't tell me, right?
Yeah.
And so for some reason, like by the grace of God, like I was able to have that clarity sitting with him and say to him, like, I now have the opportunity to show you what it feels like to be loved unconditionally, because now I know. And I don't love you like even though you told me. I love you even more because you told me. And for him to feel like this thing that he was so terrified to have exposed and revealed did not make him unlovable. It's really powerful for our family to walk in that. So I
Yeah, I
think
would.
for me too, in the writing of the book, it was like I too should reveal the things that I'm carrying shame around, or that I think might make me unlovable. I wanted to leave the book having sort of shaken off as much shame as possible.
Were you scared writing the book?
Yes, I quit writing it like once a day. Once a day, I was like, enough. This is ridiculous. This is crazy. Or like the abortion story, I wrote that one day, the story of my abortion, I wrote and was like, well, that doesn't belong in the book. Like, I'm never putting that in the book. And like emailed it to a friend and was like, hold on, that has no place in the book. And then my editor read that end of the book that you were talking about, where I say, that our reproductive lives are shrouded in secrecy. And I sort of briefly breezed through that I had a miscarriage and an abortion. And she was like, you can't just drop that in casually. Like, do you want to maybe open up about one of those two things? And I was like, oh God. So I went back and I looked at the abortion story, and I realized that it did have a place in the book. When I wrote it very early on. So I didn't know where it would fit, but I realized that story is really about my loss of privacy. And the attack on our reproductive rights that's happening right now all over the country is an attack on all of our privacy.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
so it felt like, oh, this goes here. This is about sort of, again, my struggling with sense of identity and agency. And as women, we deserve to know who we are and feel safe who we are and make decisions about ourselves and our bodies without anybody else impacting that.
Yes, I totally agree. And I do think stories like yours really help people feel not alone, um,
Mm.
seen and acknowledged, and the way that you walk through the world and speak so beautifully without shame is really important.
Mm.
Um, so
Can I tell
thank
you that the big thing that people do when they read the book, which is really fun and also can be intense, but is mostly just an honor and really fun, is that people tell me their family secrets. That's what everybody does when they read when they read the book. And I mean, like in one-on-one situations, like
This is
it's
good.
crazy. Like, I mean, with good friends that I've had for a long time, or people who work for me, or like in these meet and greets on tour, like I had 30 seconds with somebody in a meet and greet, and they'll say like, I had a frozen boy, or they'll say like, I was born of a sperm donor, or they'll say like, my daughter's adopted and I haven't told her. I mean, like, insane. And you just realize how much we all want to shake off the shame. We all want to feel like we can say our truth and still be hugged and loved and accepted,
And I think the way that you and Earl and Valerie have handled all of this and like gone forward in the world together, holding hands and loving each other and showing that your bond is even stronger because of truth is so helpful for people. And I think people dream of having that kind of emotional honesty with their parents. I certainly do.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of it, but I'm like, I want to know everything because we're here for a finite amount of time. And you just, this infinite feeling of love and acceptance is what we all want.
It's really, I have to say, my parents are teaching me about good parenting right now, because it's not always comfortable. They weren't thrilled with the idea of me writing this memoir. And even now my dad will say like, yeah, it's not the book I would have written.
Okay, I'll write your own book.
That's what I said. I'm like, well, where the world is waiting for your book. But they have been so supportive, so proud you're right. They have stood with me, you know, that beautiful shoot we did together in People magazine and going on Robin Roberts together. Like they
Yeah.
have really stood by me and walked in truth with me and together. And I think like that is so much, that's so often what the call to parenting is about being willing to be uncomfortable to do what's right for our kids. So to watch them do it for me is making me so, I mean, I'm just so inspired to be able to hold that kind of space for my kids and their truth and what they need. You know,
Yeah.
it's really so aspirational as parents.
It's amazing. And you can see it. It comes through in everything that you guys reveal to the world. And we're so thankful that you do.
Did you see my dad on Watch What Happens Live?
Yes.
He was the bartender. He was so good. He was so
It's
good.
his moment, and it's really exciting.
Really
I just love our parents so much.
I know. They're such
Your
dorkers.
dad was the one who's like, you know, you and Reese are the same person.
Yeah.
From the Bronx. I mean, you're from the Bronx and she's from Nashville. Because we both did so many similar things growing up. Anyway, these are a couple of fan questions. First, I want to just thank everybody for being here and listening.
Yes, thank you guys for listening.
A copy of the book. There's so much more in the book that I can even fit into this amount of time that is so beautiful. And the last chapter, forget it. I just was weeping when you talk about Marissa. Like, so let me ask you a couple of fan questions.
Love it.
Okay. So you just mentioned that people are sort of sharing their stories with you. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to bring their own stories to life? Like, where do you begin?
Yeah, it's so funny. So I want to tell you this like behind the scenes content that did not make it onto the Robin Roberts special. So Robin said, you know, do you have advice for families that are trying to figure out how to walk in truth and people who are trying to figure out how to own their story? And my mother, ever the Dr. Valerie Washington, elegant, eloquent, was like, you know, I really think that it's important to find somebody safe to talk to, whether it's a best friend or a sibling or a pastor or a therapist. And then my dad goes, I beg to differ. He said, the best therapists are bartenders. It was, and I was like, well, where's the healing in that, Dad? And he was like, the healing is when they say, next round is on me. And I just love that. I love that, like, even as a family, we are like, we're just in acceptance of each other, you know? And like, I know there was a time in my life where I would have been like, how could you say that? Why would you say that's so crazy? But like, to his point, there's some validity there. Like, I get what he's saying. Everybody should choose their own path to healing and to do what they can in this life to feel comfortable and good. And so I'm more on my mom's side. I more think like good therapy and trusted sources, but you know, wherever you find that. I think it's really important. Like, I feel like that thing I said to my dad about being loved unconditionally, I think that's what everybody deserves. And I feel like if there's one thing that I want people to, I don't know, think about or take with them from the book, it's that idea that you deserve a safe space to be loved for exactly who you are, not who anybody else wants you to be. And it doesn't matter like what you've done or what you haven't done or what you've achieved or haven't achieved. Like, just because you were born, just because you're here, just because you are, you deserve to be loved unconditionally. And so to find those safe spaces, it may not be a book that you write for people to read all over the world, but it might be one friend or a therapist or a pastor or a bartender, like, but find a place where you feel like you can be in your truth and give yourself that gift in this lifetime to really be yourself and know that you deserve love.
Yeah, because there's a group out there for anybody who really needs to open up and share. There, you find your group. You know, it's important. That's how you and I connected, definitely through sharing.
Yes, being vulnerable with each other.
Of sharing stuff that you've hidden and kept secret. What is the best way to tell someone really hard truth? Like, is there a way or a process of doing it?
Oh, oh, I don't know. I think it's I think it's difficult. It's different for each person, depending on what your truth is. But I will say one trick I've learned is bookending. And I've done this with you. I've done this with other friends where like, if I'm going to do something difficult, have a conversation with a really good friend before you go in to like affirm yourself and feel loved and feel connected. And then say like, I'll talk to you after, so that no matter how it goes, you have like a safe exchange with the person beforehand and a safe exchange with a person afterward. That bookending really helps me deal with the scary in the middle.
That is amazing advice.
I do a lot of bookending with Tracy Ellis Ross too.
Yes.
She's somebody I
Yes.
bookend with a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, we just spoke this weekend at a thing and
I know. Congratulations at your Hello Sunshine Festival festivities. It was amazing.
and Tracy, isn't she just the greatest?
Mine.
One of my favorite things she does is give language to feelings in the most beautiful way.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things here is, do you want to talk about your relationship with water and how you chose this beautiful cover?
I love it. So that cover is actually a painting. It's a painting of it's a hyper-realistic painting of a photograph. I know. And we shot the photograph. Yes, this incredible artist. Her name's Raisha Perlmutter, and she's divinely talented and so beautiful and extraordinary. And this is what she does. She does these phenomenal underwater portraits. And I knew that I knew it's a memoir. So
You're telling me that's a painting.
it's a painting. That is a painting. So, and it's huge too. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to put it. It's huge.
My front door. You'd be like, that's me.
And we shot it in my parents' pool, which is very sweet. I know. And my dad was sitting there the whole time. It was so sweet. And I just felt like, we do these photo shoots because photo shoots are such a big part of our job, I was like, how am I going to take a photo of myself for the cover of the book that really feels like me? That doesn't feel like I'm performing. That doesn't feel like I'm like movie star, TV star Kerry, like really me. And when I saw her work, I thought, well, there's something very like in the womb about it, because it's like in the water of the womb kind of. And you can't have makeup on when you're underwater. It's just pure. So I thought that was a great way. And I love the reflection. You know what's really cool? So the original photo is you have to turn it horizontal because I'm looking up at the surface of the water. And it was Gracie's idea, my daughter Gracie's idea, to turn it vertical so that it was kind of like a mirror. And it's like I'm trying to understand who I am in the reflection. It's just so fun. Isn't that fun?
And it really plays on your love of water, your love of swimming, your love of being submerged, and you have a beautiful way that you end the book of talking about what water means to you, and that when you're underwater, you can only hear the most important voice, which is your own.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Also, I was playing on this phrase, the title of the book, with, thicker than water, because we say all the time, blood is thicker than water. And so I have this phrase in the book that we say that blood is thicker than water, but love is thicker than blood. But then also very early on, Trevor Noah is one of the other trusted people that I sent the book to very early on. And he said, the original verse in the Bible is that the water, that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, meaning the promises that we make and the relationships we make are more important than the families that we're born into. And I was like, oh my God, that's the book. It really is like my dad's promise to me to be my dad is so much more valuable than any genetic test.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful.
Oh.
That's like that. And I love the way you talk about your name, Marissa.
Yeah.
Can you talk about you? I didn't know your name was Kerry Marissa.
Yes. Kerry Marissa is now my legal first name. And yeah, my parents chose it because it's Princess of the Sea. My family, our whole relationship, I talk in the book how my parents' first date ended with an agreement to meet at the beach the next day. Like swimming is such a huge part of who we are. My dad fell in love with my mom when he watched her dive into the ocean that very first day. And it's so sweet when you talk to him about it still, like his eyes light up when he talks about her two-piece bathing suit and how she just dove into the water. And, he knew that she was different and courageous and adventurous. I think about that because I think about the courage that it took them to take on this risky, artificial insemination, this risky endeavor, and that it was because they wanted me so badly that they were willing to take on this crazy experimental world.
And where are you in you searching for your donor parent? Are you talking about that, or is that something that's
Yeah,
private?
no, it is. I am. I have a really incredible team. It's still Skip Gates' team that's helping me look for the donor. And I call him the donor, not my, even though Skip is like, he's your biological father. I'm like, I don't know that he deserves that word. Like, and he didn't sign up for it also, right? Like back then, again, we didn't know that there would be genetic testing. Like this person did not sign up to be a parent. And I don't need a parent. I have a beautiful mom and dad. And this book is about the beauty of the magic of our relationship, the three of us. But I am curious about this other half of me scientifically, genetically. I think I read a lot of stories about donor kids or adopted kids meeting their biological parent and being like, whoa, that's where I got my hands, or that's where my eyes, or that walk, or, I'm just curious, like what I might discover about myself. But I'm not like seeking a relationship. I'm really seeking information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's not a longing there. There's just a
I don't think
curiosity.
so. There's a lot of curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wow. Well, Kerry, I just want to say thank you. This has been such an amazing process of getting to know you even better. I don't know why. I thought I knew everything.
You still know more than most. You still know more than most.
It's really beautiful, and I think it's such a gift that you share with people, and you speak so beautifully. You're always somebody I look up to and I admire, and I've had such incredible experiences with you on and off screen. That this is just a real deep dive into your heart, and I really want to thank you for that. And I hope everybody picks up a copy of Thicker Than Water. It's one of the most beautiful memoirs I've ever read, honestly.
Thank you. And I know so many of you are in here because you did pre-order. And Reese, thank you for incentivizing everybody to pre-order so they could have a sneak peek in this conversation. And just thank you to everybody who has read it already and who's spreading the word. And yeah, I love, especially when people tell me that they listen to the audio, because I read the audio and that was such a personal experience. So I'm really, really grateful to everybody who's joining in this adventure with me.
Well, we love you, Kerry. You are so loved and cherished. So thank you.
Love
Great.
you.
Mwah!
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.